Okay, so let's go ahead and look at chapter 2 of the 6th edition of the ACE Personal Trainer Certification textbook workbook. Chapter 2 finishes up this introductory section, which along with chapter 1 is basically designed to give you an introduction to what's obviously going to follow with more specificity throughout the textbook. So chapter 2 is basically an intro to the ACE Integrated Fitness Training Model, or the IFT model. They've made some significant changes from their last edition of the textbook, and so they've actually made it a little bit easier, a little bit simpler to understand. They've also added some other interesting elements that you're going to find probably pretty helpful. And so chapter 2 is going to give you an introduction basically to all this. Now, keep in mind, just like with chapter 1, chapter 2 is going to give you some broad and general information, not a whole lot of memorization needed in chapter 2. However, don't be so quick just to move over chapter 2. The way the textbook was designed was to get you sort of prompted into understanding the importance of why you're going through the rest of the textbook. ACE has done a pretty good amount of research, and they've come up with some pretty interesting information about their IFT model, which they're actually going to let you know about at the end of this chapter. So the understanding is that there are traditional training parameters versus what is now known as the contemporary training parameters. And so on page 35, it's not a bad idea to kind of look at table 2 and get an understanding of what the traditional training is. Probably what most of us grew up with, for sure, individuals of in my age category. It was basically weight training and some cardio and maybe some stretching, maybe, some of those things, other modalities to help out flexibility, things like that. And that was the traditional, and we've brought that into our training of clients. But today, things have basically changed. And so chapter 2 wants to help you understand why the IFT model was instituted and how it can help you as a trainer in the contemporary sort of training scenario that you're going to be in. So contemporary training parameters now, and if you look at that table, you now have health behavior change. By the way, you have all of what you had in the traditional training parameters, but now the idea is that those have been expanded because we have more information, more data, more research that supports adding these other parameters. So you can see flexibility is in there on both sides, but now we do core conditioning. We put a fair amount of time and effort into balance training, for instance, kinetic chain mobility. And so that's why table 2.1 on page 35 is important to know. And so as you continue to move through chapter 2, you're going to get to, on page 37, conceptually a really important part of what ACE wants you to figure out when it comes to the rest of the chapters in the textbook, which is that exercising should be focused on a continuum from function, health, fitness, and performance. So there is this continuum of how people should be training exercise-wise and activity-wise. And so functional training and being functional, right? Being healthy, being fit, right? Because there's a difference between just health overall and then fitness, and then an even higher level of functionality, so to speak, which is the performance area. And so you have this idea of function, health, fitness, and performance continuum. And the idea is that a personal trainer working with a client should understand where this individual is beginning, right? Them physically, physiologically, and where they need to be moving through this continuum, or where they even want to get to in the continuum. So that's an important component there. And then what ACE will do is give you this introduction to their integrated fitness training model. So just keep in mind there really does need to be a formalized way in which we can take any individual, bring them into the health, wellness, fitness community and training paradigm, and move them from whatever start position they're at physiologically, whether they've trained before or even if they're an athlete, and how to move them systematically and formally in an efficient, effective way so that they're not wasting their time and they're not training inappropriately for their particular physiological state. And so on page 38, ACE introduces you to their new, right, new, redone, simpler, easier to understand. I tend to believe here. Um, IFT model, integrated fitness training model. They have two tiers. One is for cardiorespiratory training, and the other is for muscular training. And again, just keep in mind, all of this is explained in great detail and specificity in later chapters. But the idea is that as you're kind of perusing and going through these first couple of chapters, it gives you a heads up, gives you something to think about and consider. Make sure you memorize this information. Make sure you memorize the three, because it's three tiers on each of those, and it's based on or surrounds and is supported by what's known as the ACE mover method. And again, they will explain that a little bit more, because ultimately what ACE wants you to keep in mind is that this training is all client centered. And so a client centered approach to personal training is what this mover method concept is really going to help you, it's going to help you to move through, understand, and ultimately memorize and then utilize. So figure 2.2 on page 38, you have the base cardiorespiratory training, fitness training, and then performance training. There's three tiers, and there's ways to train people in each of those tiers. And then on the muscular training side of it, right, resistance training for the most part, there's also three tiers. And just as an aside, it used to be 5 tiers, and now they've changed it to 3 to make it a lot easier to deal with the vast majority of your clients will probably be. So we have functional training, movement training, load and speed training. That's in the muscular training side of the house, so to speak. When you get to page 39, keep an eye out now for how ACE utilizes these training components and variables around the mover method. And so what they're going to do is they're going to give you these information boxes, these mover method boxes. When it comes to memorizing it for an exam, just as a for instance, it's probably not that critical. However, it gives you an insight into what the mover method is about and how it's incorporated and used. And so if you look on page 39, this client-centered approach to personal training basically gives you insight into now what's known as the ABC method, which is in the mover method, or the ABC approach. So ACE has sort of created, right? It's not new, but it's a formalized, easier way to understand what the mover method is about and how to train people through the IFT model. It's the ABC approach: ask open-ended questions. So here's the behavioral change component. Break down barriers to build and develop rapport so your client has trust. And then of course, collaborate. We're really talking about the motivational interviewing, and you'll hear all of that later on through the textbook. But again, this is an introduction to it. If you've never heard of it or you're not familiar with any of it, it should kind of perk your interest. It's basically the way we've been training people. It's just now sort of codified and put into a formalized system, which is great. And then as you move through, read through the chapter, but essentially what you're going to get to is an overview now on page 42 of the cardiorespiratory training side of the house. So they're going to briefly explain to you what base training is, what fitness cardiorespiratory training is. And again, you don't have to spend a lot of time reading and memorizing this, because it's all going to be explained later on anyway. So on page 45, bingo, table. As soon as you see a table, go ahead and slow it down, Again, if it's me, and I forgot to tell you this in the beginning, remember every chapter, have your paper. Look, chapters 1 and chapter 2, you're probably not going to be writing a whole lot, but it can't hurt to write this down. So cardiorespiratory training, I would go ahead and go, okay, what are my 3 levels of cardio training? Base training, fitness training, and performance, and write that down. Base training, fitness, and performance, right? Base training. And if you do it over and over, you'll memorize it. This is giving you a basic overview. Remember, you're going to need to learn the specifics in later chapters. And then, of course, performance training, moving on to page 46, they go to the other side of the IFT model, which is the muscular training. And again, they'll do basically the same thing. Movement training deals with, just as a for instance, bend and lift movements, single leg movements. And by the way, these are the 5 basic movement patterns that, again, you'll get into in later chapters: pushing, pulling, and rotational movements. Okay. If you've never thought about these, by the way, in your personal own training, right? The way you train, it's actually pretty effective. We've been using these concepts for many years in athletic training and getting people prepped for whatever sport, athletic sport they're in. We use it as, or we've always used it as part of like a conditioning training and ensuring that all 5 of these movements are incorporated into workouts, or at least weekly micro periodization cycles. So again, you move through the chapter. ACE is now going to, again, another table just on the muscular training side of it, right? ACE is going to now step back and go, look, here's the real deal with what our training model says, because some folks go through this and they go, that's not how I train people. That's not how I train personally. But what ACE is telling you is that you should feel confident in the IFT training model, because they actually have research that backs up the efficacy of their system. And again, whether or not you train like this, it's important to understand that a formalized, systematic way of training is not just something new. To get athletes into good condition and prepared for their sport, there has to be a systematic way of dealing with their physiology and their training. This is not new. What ACE is doing is they're showing you that in the personal training world now, it's a good idea to incorporate this into your training scenario, whatever that's going to be. And so that's what pages 51 and 52 and 50 are basically showing you. Read up on that. Now we've gotten to the end of chapter. Once again, chapter 1, chapter 2 should not take very long to read through, give you a good idea, good general understanding of now why the IFT model is such an effective way to help people to achieve their goals. So again, the end of chapter 2, we're going to be moving into section 2, beginning with chapter 3, and that will go through 3, 4, 5, and 6. So again, end of section 1, which was 1 and 2, and I look forward to seeing you on chapter 3.